Codex is a step up from ChatGPT, and unlike the name suggests, it does not require any coding or engineering experience. I'm a software developer with almost 10 years of experience, and I'll show you how to use it to automate tasks in your business. There are 3 ways to use Codex. First is a standalone app. You can also embed it within a code editor, or you can use it straight from the terminal. For this video, I'm going to stick to the standalone app. If you're a beginner, for all intents and purposes, you should be using the standalone app. It's the most convenient way and it doesn't lack any features. The first thing you'll want to do is download it. I'll leave the link in the video description. It's available for both macOS and Windows, and its usage is tied to your ChatGPT subscription, even though it's a separate app, so you'll also need a ChatGPT subscription. So I've downloaded it, logged in using my account, and right off the bat you can see that it looks very similar to ChatGPT. At least it has the same kind of input box. Okay, let's go over the basics. On the right, you can select what model to use. There's no reason why you wouldn't want to use the latest version of GPT, so I'll just leave it like this. But at the end of the video, we'll also talk about how you can hook up other models, including Claude, into Codex, but we don't need to get over this now. Here you can select for how long you want the model to reason. Generally, the more it does, the slower the responses get, but some hard problems do require a lot of reasoning. I generally like to leave this at light because I found that it is able to execute most queries correctly at a really good speed, but if it struggles, I'll just go here and tune it up to extra high and try again. There's also this setting here on the left. In contrast to ChatGPT, Codex can do a lot of things on your computer, like browse the internet or delete or edit files, and by default it'll ask for your approval for every action. This can get very tedious, as sometimes it'll ask for approval 10 or 20 times per query for things that are not really unsafe. There's also these 2 options, full access and approve for me. Full access will let it do anything, and then approve for me will only ask for approval for things that are potentially unsafe. I like to use this. It rarely asks for approval, and I find that when it does, I actually do want to approve it. So I suggest you do the same. In order to effectively use Codex, we need to choose a project right here and then go to new project and then use an existing folder. I have created a Codex 1 folder on my desktop, so we'll use that. And this will contain Codex within just that folder. So it's not gonna go and interact with the rest of the file system and potentially mangle with other files. So if you look inside the Codex 1 folder, I've just dumped a bunch of files, and these are actually dummy files. They're not from my business, but they're accounting and delivery files of a dummy software development agency. I'll now ask Codex to please organize my files into subfolders and give me a P&L segmented by client. It took the model about 3 minutes to complete this job, and if we go back to the folder, we can see that all of our files are now organized into admin, reporting, accounts receivable, etc. We can also see that the model has produced a spreadsheet. We can open this right within Codex and see that it has indeed segmented our revenue and profit based on each client. I'm going to close this tab here on the top right, and I'm going to click this. So this will let us inspect what the model has done to produce its response. So first it decided to use some kind of workflow, and then it started using tools. So this is one of the big differences again between ChatGPT and Codex, is that Codex is able to use a bunch of tools and interact with your operating system to achieve its goals. So we can see that it read some skills, it listed some files, read some skills again, then it thought a little bit more, and then it started creating files, editing files, and even creating folders. And at the end, it took some screenshots of the resulting spreadsheet in order to verify its work. And after that, it produced the response. What I just showcased is the agent loop. As described here on the OpenAI blog, you can see this useful infographic. It starts with the user input, which is the prompt, which then goes into the model. And every time it goes into the model, there are 2 decisions that can be taken. Number one, the model can produce a final response, or it can choose to call one of the tools. And if it does that, its responses get fed back into the model, and then the model can choose to call another tool or produce the final response, which is exactly what happened here on our prompt. First, the model thought, then it invoked some tools, and then the response from the tools were fed back into the model. Then the model decided to call even more tools, and then it finally produced its response. If you were to use ChatGPT, you would just have a user input, then a model inference, and then a response. But with Codex, you have this loop right here, which goes between the model inference and the tool calls. Now what I'll do is I'll ask Codex to create an interactive dashboard for, and then I'll press Shift and 2 to get the @ symbol, and then I'll try to find our file, which is client PNL Q1 2025, and you'll see that now the file is embedded within the prompt that we're going to send to Codex. And basically with the @ symbol, you can reference to specific files to guide the model to use those if you'd like. So let's run this. So it just finished, took about 4 minutes, and we already have our interactive dashboard. The possibilities with this tool are quite literally endless, but I just want to take a quick break and discuss prompting. Elsewhere on the internet, you're going to find gurus having very specific prompting techniques, oftentimes telling the model, oh, like, hey, you're an expert data analyst or you're an expert web developer, but none of this works. It's 2026 and the models are so good that as long as you describe what you want to do in clear English, they'll accomplish it. These tricks don't work, and they can even backfire by diluting your context window. The only tip that I can give you is if you have a very complex prompt, you can tell the model to check its work after it's done. For example, if you have the AI model create a bunch of PDF invoices from an Excel file, you can tell it, hey, after you're done, go into the folder with the PDFs, pick a couple at random and see that, this and this text is in the invoice. Also, if you have a very long prompt that's say over 20 paragraphs, you should include the important information in the beginning of the prompt. Even though these models can support a very big prompt, there's been some studies that have shown us that the longer the prompt is, the more the model tends to ignore the stuff that's in the middle. But in general, do not overthink it. Just be clear, concise, and if it makes any mistakes, you can tell it to correct itself later. Now I'm back in Codex and I want to discuss memory. There's two types in Codex, global memory and project level memory. So in order to access global memory, you have to click on the bottom left, then go to settings and then personalization. And you'll see three types of settings. Number one is the personality. There's two options here, friendly and pragmatic. I find that they make absolutely no difference. I've set it to pragmatic, but I think I could do exactly the same work on friendly. I don't find that it makes any difference. Custom instructions is a big part, and that's where you can add rules for how you want Codex to perform in any project. I've added some global rules for when I'm coding, and I rarely change this anymore, but this is very, very useful. There's also a memory section. This is enabled by default. I have disabled it because I want to have full control over what gets in my Codex prompts. If you have this enabled, it'll inject past memories that it creates into your prompts, and it can unnecessarily clutter your prompts, but you can also try leaving it on and see if that helps you. In order to use project level memory, you have to go to your projects folder and create a file that's named agents.md. It needs to have this specific name to be picked up by Codex, and then if I preview this, it can just be a text file where you type your rules in plain text. I wish there was a more user-friendly way to do this through the UI, but right now the only way to do it is by creating this file. The project level memory will only be picked up when you're working on this specific project. So for example, you'll see here that I've only added rules when it comes to accounting. Another thing I want to introduce is skills. A skill is basically like a saved prompt in Codex, so you can create it and then reuse it without having to type it all over again. And in order to create a skill, we first need to get out of our project by clicking the X button right here. Skills are global, and if you're in a project, it sometimes confuses Codex and it will tell you that your skill was created when in fact it wasn't, so always do it globally. Then we go on the prompt and we do Shift-4 to get the $, and then pick the skill creator, and then we can describe what skill we want. So I can say something like create a skill that will help me upload Square social media images with my brand colors, and then I can paste my brand colors. Obviously you can create something much more complex than this, but it's good enough for the purposes of illustration. When it's finished, it'll say that the skill was created, and we can click to inspect it, and you'll see that it created very verbose instructions on how to create these social media pictures. If you don't like what it comes up with, you can obviously go back and forth and tell it to fix it, but I think this is good enough, so I'm going to close this, then go back inside our project and create a new conversation, and let's try to use the skill. In order to do that, we'll press Shift-4 again and then try to find it. Should be branded social images. And then I'll ask it to create an image for the 4th of July, since I'm recording this on the 4th of July. Happy Independence Day to everybody. And our picture was created in square dimensions using the brand colors that I indicated. Another thing worth discussing is scheduled tasks. You can find them on the top left here. They used to be called automations, but what they let you do is schedule a prompt to run at a certain interval. You can create them by going on the top right here and then clicking create manually. And the first thing that you can tune is when this repeats. So it could be daily at a certain time, it could be weekdays, it could be weekly, or you can create something more complex by clicking on custom and creating your own rule. I left it at daily for now. You'll also want to change the runs in from worktree to local. Worktree is only useful if you're dealing with code. You can also select a project where you want this to run, or it can run globally. I'll select the Codex 1 project that we already created. I'll name the task create social media pictures on holidays. I'll create the prompt. This will be if today is a holiday, use and then Shift-4 to get the $, and then finding our skill to create an image for our social media, and then I'll create it. So as long as this remains in status active, it'll run every day at 9 a.m. We can see that the next run is in 19 hours, but we can also run it manually by clicking the button on the top right. So now it's done, and we can go and inspect the result. So it said created today's US Independence Day social image, and it used our brand colors again, and it's a square picture just like we had asked on the skill that we created. But if today weren't a holiday, this would just not create anything. Scheduled tasks can be very powerful, and they can be used to automate an array of chores that you'd need to do manually. Things like social media, as we saw, doing your accounting at the end of every week or every month, or following up with leads. Another thing we'll take a look at is plugins here on the top left, and plugins let ChatGPT interact with other apps or websites. There's a bunch of them, but one of my favorites is the Gmail one. So you can connect it with your Gmail and it can find or create emails for you. This can also be combined with scheduled tasks, and for example, you can have Codex create a daily report for you based on your latest emails. It's very straightforward how this works. You just pick the plugin you're interested in, you connect your account, and then you can click try and chat, and you can reference the plugin by doing Shift-2 to get the @ symbol, and then for example, you can reference to Gmail or any other app and tell it to use it in order to achieve a goal. Arguably, the two most powerful plugins are Computer Use and Chrome, because a lot of the apps will not have their own dedicated plugin, but you can still interact with them through Computer Use if they're an app, or through Chrome if they're a website. Another thing that you can do is if you go on the top right, there's an option to record a skill. So you can have Codex watch you do something on your computer, and then in theory it should be able to then create its own app and emulate your actions. Just keep in mind that this is experimental and it might not always work the way you want it to work. There's another thing that's very similar to plugins, and that is MCP servers. In order to view them, you have to click on the bottom left, then go to settings, and then click MCP servers on the left. This is very similar to plugins, but instead of being specific to Codex, MCP servers are a generalized interface for AI to interact with third-party services. So if you have an MCP server, it can work with Codex, but it can also work with Cloud Code, OpenCode, or other AIs. And the benefit of this is that there are third-party MCP marketplaces. The biggest one is Apify, and they have almost 50,000 tools for your AI. This is functionality that you wouldn't be able to find on the Codex plugin marketplace. There are literally so many tools. In order to use them, you'll need to create an account on Apify and then connect it with Codex through the settings. You can also connect Codex with your mobile phone if you have the ChatGPT app, and then you can send prompts from your mobile phone to your computer. And it doesn't even matter if the two devices are on the same Wi-Fi network or even in close proximity. That means that you can be stuck somewhere, like in a bank, waiting for 20 or 30 minutes, and you can still pull up your phone and keep working. The last thing that I want to show, and this is a little bit more advanced, is how to access Codex's config file. In order to do that on Mac, you need to open up the terminal, and then you need to paste the command that I'll have in the video description. And then once you do that, you can go back to your desktop and you'll see that there's a new CodexConfig folder right there. So we can open it, and right off the bat, you'll see that there's an agents.md file in here. If we open it, it's our custom instructions that we declared globally. If you remember, we had created an agents.md file inside our project for the project-specific instructions, but there's also a global agents.md file. It's just hidden inside the CodexConfig folder. There's a bunch of other files here. Some of them are database files, and most of them aren't really that useful to us, but one that is this config.tomo file. I've opened it using a text editor, and it contains some interesting things. For example, it sets the personality to pragmatic, as we had seen, and the model to GPT 5.5, and the reasoning effort to low. Any changes that you make here, and also inside the agents.md file, will be reflected on your Codex app. An interesting thing that we can do is add this piece of code that will integrate Codex with OpenRouter and let us use any model on Codex. I've chosen to use the Kimi K2 model from Moonshot AI, and if we open Codex back up, you'll see that it now says custom here instead of GPT. Bear in mind that in order to do this, you'll need an account on OpenRouter.ai, but once you have one, you can integrate with literally any model, including Claude. So you can use Codex but with the Claude models, which is kind of funny. So that was it. It's important to note that while Codex is powerful, it still has its limitations. If you'd like us to help you integrate AI into your business, book a call using the link in the video description.